All right. So, as Rick mentioned, my name is Wayne Weissman. My wife is Patty. She is with me this week. Sorry you haven't seen her yet this morning. And we have 4 children, 11 grandchildren. And we live in Kimball. I'm sorry?
It's called multiplication.
Yes, and we're very happy about it. We currently live in Kimball, Nebraska, which is southwestern Nebraska. So if you go 17 miles south from our hometown, from our town, you run into Colorado. If you go 20 miles west from our town, you run into Wyoming. So we're right there in the corner, close to Wyoming, close to Colorado. We raised our children in Colorado, in the mountains of Colorado, town called Estes Park. There's a Bible school there. It's called Ravencrest Chalet. It's similar to this school. So we raised our children with people like you every day and every year. Except during the summer, then we had campers. Campers would come. You guys were with campers this past weekend or week or something?
Yes, we were.
Yes, you were, yes. Well, we had them come all summer, and we just had a great time. So that's where my children were raised, in the mountains. And very grateful for that opportunity. Okay, so that's some details about our lives. How are you guys? You're sleepy? Did you not sleep well? Well, you're still sleepy. Okay. When did you awaken? This morning? 7:15. Okay. What time did you go to bed? 9:45? 10:45. All right. All right. Otherwise, you guys are okay? All right. You know what we're studying together? Exodus. We're studying Exodus. I have to apologize. There was a schedule on the bulletin board downstairs. Is that where you normally keep it, right down at the bottom of the stairs? And I asked Rick if I could have a paper copy, and so he gave me that one. So if there's one missing that you would normally look at, it's in my room. But I imagine another one will go up there, so I apologize. I took it from you. All right, so what have you studied so far this year? Genesis. Discipleship, Genesis. So John and Luke, that's in process, right? Right? Creation.
How to live undivided in a polarized world.
The what?
The Jewish faith.
The Jewish faith. Okay. Mormonism. The feasts of Israel. Okay. All right. Good. Well, thanks for telling me that. Well, we're going to look at Exodus. So I believe Rick asked you to read that before I arrived. Am I correct? I'm getting this? Okay. I got the sense, I wrote to him and I asked him to have you read it, or to ask you to read it. He can't have you read it. That's going to be your own choice. But I asked him to ask you, and my understanding is he did. And so I'm not going to check with you to see if you read it or not. My intention was that you would have had the opportunity. How many chapters long is Exodus? 40. So that you would have had the opportunity to read the 40 chapters, just to be familiar, a little more familiar than you would have been before you read it. So when we go through it together, it'll have some familiarity to you. That was the whole intention. That was about it. If you didn't read it, it's fine. If you did read it, that's fine too. I'm not going to ask anybody. But I am going to ask you this. First of all, is this the eraser? Does anybody know?
Yeah. If you want, I can get you a paper towel. Better.
Well, we'll see how it goes. But thank you. Yeah. and that may be a better option. Okay, so if you have or have not read Exodus, it makes no difference, other than perhaps your ability to answer this question. What's Exodus about?
Leaving Egypt.
Sorry?
Leaving Egypt.
Leaving Egypt. Ooh, nice marker. Leaving Egypt. Who?
Israelites.
Oh, the Israelites. And you guys have studied the Jewish faith, so that gives you a sense of who the Israelites are?
Yes.
Okay, leaving Egypt. Who left Egypt? The Israelites. All right, what can you tell me about the Israelites?
God's chosen people.
What does that mean?
He chose them specifically out of all the other peoples of the world to be their God.
Because of his promise to Abraham.
I'm sorry?
Because of his promise to Abraham.
Okay. God's chosen people. That, if I understand what you said, that he chose them out of all the peoples of the world that he would be their God. Right? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Okay. God's chosen people. Okay. We'll just say, we'll just go with God's. God's chosen people. Because of his promise to Abraham. Promise to Abraham. What promise?
That his descendants would be more than the stars in the sky, and he would rule forever, and kings will come from him.
That his descendants will be more than the stars of the sky, and then what?
Nations will come from him, and kings will come from him.
Nations and kings will come from him, okay? Okay, why did God make a promise to Abraham?
Because he wanted to.
That's true.
To save the world from sin.
Oh. That's interesting. A promise to Abraham to save the world from sin. How was a promise to Abraham going to save the world from sin?
Part of the promise is that through him all the nations of the world might be saved.
Part of the promise is that through Abraham, all the nations of the world would be saved. Now, these are the nations, apparently, I'm guessing these are the nations you're referring to that from which Israel was extracted. What's your name?
Alexis.
Alexis? And your name? Nick, yeah. Now, if I ask you more than once, I apologize in advance now. I wish I didn't have to,
No
but
worries.
understood, and thank you, but still, I apologize. Okay, so Alexis said God's chosen people means that God, in essence, extracted. You know what extract means? To take out from within something. So God extracted from the nations Israel, and they became his chosen people. Correct? We're there? Okay, so God then took Abraham, which is he? Abram at this time, when he made the promise. Okay, he took Abram when he made the promise and said, through you, Abram, I'm going to, say it again, please.
Through you that you might save all the nations of the world.
Save all the nations of the world, the same nations that Alexis referred to,
I believe so, yeah.
And more.
and more. Okay, what do you guys think? Are you guys on that page? You agree with that?
Yeah, otherwise my nation isn't included.
What's your nation?
America.
Okay. You guys agree?
Yes.
Okay, so how is that going to happen? Through Abram. Look at the stars. Through you, I'm going to save the nations of the world. What does that mean? Sorry? Through his descendants. Okay, that's fair. Okay, now also, just so you know, if I ask you to repeat yourself or if I lean in, it's not to threaten or to intimidate you. It's merely because I didn't hear you. That's not necessarily your fault. More than likely, it's my fault with these.
We're being kind of quiet.
You are? That's all right. And there is a lot of road noise. That's okay too. This is where we are. It's fine. Okay, so through many descendants. Is that what you said? Through his descendants? All right, how many descendants did Abram have when God told him that you're going to save the world? I'm going to save the world through your descendants. How many did Abram have? Zero. Why is that? Didn't he want to have children?
His wife was barren.
Who's his wife?
Sarah.
Sarah?
Sarai at the time.
Sarai at the time? Changed to Sarah. Right. God changed her name to Sarah. God changed Abram's name to, I wrote Abraham. Was I wrong in writing Abraham? No. Well, so his name was Abram, Nick said, right? What does Abram mean? Sorry?
I want to say Abraham means father of many nations, and like Abram is father of something. Multitude.
Abram, in mine it says exalted father.
Okay, excuse me, what was that just happened there?
I tried using Siri, but it didn't work.
Okay, that's fine. All right, so your name's Kate, and so tell us again.
Abram means exalted father, and Abraham means father of many.
Okay, so Abram means exalted father, and how many children did God have? Or how many children did Abram have? Zero. So he wasn't really an exalted father, was he? Then he became a father of many. Okay, so that's good. All right, so he had 0 children. God was going to give him many descendants. Look at the stars, Abram. Can you count them? No. Well, that's how many descendants you're going to have. Did Abram believe?
He believed initially.
No, because his wife was barren.
He had Ishmael.
Yeah, but before Ishmael.
That shows doubt.
Well, yeah.
It said that Abram believed in the Lord and it was credited to him as righteousness.
Yeah.
Where does it say that?
Oh, chapter 15, verse 6.
And where's that quoted? In the New Testament.
In the New Testament. Oh,
It'll cross-reference, won't it?
no.
Oh, you don't have that?
Oh, it's in Hebrews.
Well, okay, we don't have to go there, but the fact is that Abram believed and it was accounted to him as righteousness, and that is then quoted in the New Testament, validating the faith of Abram. Yeah. Apparently, eventually, something was going on because he had Ishmael, right?
Yeah.
So something's going on. So who's Ishmael?
The daughter of Sarah's handmaiden.
The daughter of Sarah's handmaiden.
Son, not
Hagar.
daughter.
Son, that's right. I'm sorry, I just went with you.
Hagar.
Yeah, Hagar. Who's she?
A servant of Egypt.
She was an Egyptian handmaid, right. Of who? Sarah. She was Sarah's handmaid. So somehow, culturally, in those days, if you can't get pregnant, you give your handmaid. I'm not really, truthfully, well familiar with that whole process. But it was not, but Ishmael was not the promised son, was he? Because the promised son was going to come through whom? Sarah, his wife. Right. So that's good. So he's going to save the world through the descendants of Abram, whose name was changed to Abraham. But that's nice, but how was he going to do that?
Say that again?
It's nice that God was going to save the nations, including America, through the descendants of Abraham, but how was God going to do that?
By eventually sending his son,
Whose son?
Jesus, God's son.
So God was going to eventually send God's son, okay, carry on,
Jesus, to come to live a perfect life, to die on the cross, to be resurrected from the dead, to do many miracles, to show who God is, and to give people an opportunity to repent of their sin.
okay? You guys agree with that? That's kind of like the gospel? Okay. Well, how is that going to happen? What's the relationship between Jesus and Abraham?
He's a descendant of Abraham.
He's a descendant of Abraham. Where does it say that?
Just in the line of genealogy that's given in Matthew and Luke. Yeah, in those two.
Right, there's a genealogy in Matthew chapter 1, and there's a genealogy in Luke chapter 3. And in fact, in Matthew chapter 1, which is the beginning of the New Testament, Matthew chapter 1, verse 1, so Matthew 1:1, the beginning of the New Testament, like the first verse of the New Testament, it says the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Whoa. So do you realize that in Matthew 1:1, we go all the way back to where's Abram first introduced?
Genesis 11.
That's correct. We go all the way back to Genesis 11 in our first verse of the New Testament. Can you comprehend that? Do you realize that the Matthew 1:1 is connected to Genesis 11? Because it is. Who was I sitting with? Matty. This morning was telling me of his friend whose last name is Enns. Nate? John. And what did John Enns say to you, Matty?
The whole Bible is just one story from beginning to end.
It's one story from beginning to end. And so, can you see? So does the idea that Matthew 1:1 is connected to Genesis chapter 11 reveal that it's one story? Does it show a connection? Well, yes, I agree. But, we want to be careful here because, do we just, kind of launch from Genesis 11, land at Matthew 1:1, and none of this really is a part of it? None of this is a part of it? Oh, it is a part of it?
Yeah, everything in between those is also part of that story.
Everything in between is also part of that story?
Oh, yeah.
Like Zechariah?
Yeah.
Like Job? Like Ezra? Chronicles? Is this all a part of the same story?
Yeah.
Do you know that? Or are you just saying it because you think that's where I'm trying to take us?
Because I feel like I've got enough evidence. I haven't personally read through the entire Bible, which is what we're through this year, but I have enough evidence from people I trust to believe that it's all one story.
And so does Matty, because he trusts John Enns. And Matty spoke with confidence.
It's not only because I trust John Enns.
Sorry?
It's not only because I trust John Enns.
But you do.
Well, yeah, I do.
But there are other reasons as well.
Well, there's a lot of stuff that's pointing specifically to Jesus as well.
In the Old Testament? Okay. All right, good. Thank you.
There's someone underneath the sink in the bathroom.
Yeah. Okay, class is over now. It's not. It was a joke. Ooh, is it all right if I use this?
Fancy.
We'll watch it later. According to Cooper, it is.
We'll do the best.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Okay. All right. Okay. So Exodus is about the Israelites leaving Egypt, right? Is that it?
Mount Sinai.
It's what?
Mount Sinai.
What's Mount Sinai?
It's a big part of the second half of Exodus.
All
God
right.
gave all the laws to Moses, or some of them. There's a lot more, but
To Moses. Who's that?
one of the Israelites that were in Egypt during the time of their slavery.
Okay. All right. And where did God give the laws to Moses?
Mount Sinai.
Some of them.
Not all of them.
No.
There's a lot of books full of the laws.
Yeah, like how many laws did God give to Moses out Mount Sinai?
At least 10.
Okay, at least 10. It's fair. Where do we find those 10 recorded? Exodus
20.
chapter 20. Okay, how many more laws are there than 10? A lot. Where would you find those?
The rest of the Torah.
Leviticus, Numbers.
The end of chapter 20 and then 21.
Wait, I'm sorry, what's your name? Zach, say that again.
At the end of chapter 20 and then 21.
What happens in 21?
Laws about slaves.
We get more laws right after the 10? I'm just going to do this so I hopefully won't trip on it. So we get more laws in chapter 21. What about 22?
It goes for a while.
We get more laws. What about chapter 23? More laws. Wow. All the way to where? Any in Numbers?
Yeah.
And Deuteronomy.
Oh, and Deuteronomy as well.
Yep.
That's correct. In fact, you know how many more there are? Does anybody want to know how many more there are? Okay, I'll tell you. There's 613 laws. It's all in the Torah. Good. Feels like more when you're reading them. Well. So what is the Torah? Because you've mentioned Torah, and somebody over here just mentioned Torah. What is that?
First 5 books of the Bible.
First 5 books of the law.
The books that Moses wrote.
Moses wrote. So they are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So Exodus is about leaving Egypt, the Israelites. That's just a given now, right? Because we've already discussed it. You know we're talking about the Israelites, okay? It's about leaving Egypt, and then it's about Sinai, which is the place where the commandments were given. Commandments were given, right? And there's 613 of them, and we start getting them in Exodus, okay? All right, so to whom were these commandments given? Israel. What about to the nations? Okay, Alexis says no. Nick says not too much. I'm not sure what to do with not too much.
No, basically. I'm just saying that 'cause this rubric right here, I don't know. It says that they apply to everyone that joins the community. Like if there's any, like aliens that come into their living quarters, then they have to follow those rules too. So.
Okay, so somebody who wants to identify with the nation of Israel, perhaps called a proselyte. If you want to be a proselyte to the nation of Israel, like for example the Ethiopian eunuch, have you ever heard of that guy? Ethiopian eunuch, of course, I'm sorry, that's all the way into the New Testament, and we're supposed to be in Exodus. The Ethiopian eunuch was a proselyte, which means in order to be a proselyte, in order to worship the God of the Hebrews in the tabernacle or the temple, you need to commit to keeping the 613 commandments. If you're a nation, if you're not a Jew, you do not have to keep the 613 commandments in order to worship God. Do you hear that? If you're not a Jew, You do not have to keep the 613 commandments in order to worship God. If you're a Jew, you do. Then.
I was going to say, that changed over time.
It changed?
When Jesus said that there's like the old law and then there's the new law. And the old covenant and the new covenant. The new covenant changed the old covenant.
Which is the old covenant?
The law.
The law. So, like the Mosaic covenant?
Yes.
Would that be proper terminology? Mosaic covenant. Okay, so now we're getting a feel on who Moses is. And now we know about this Mosaic covenant. We're going to have to go back to Abraham at some point soon. Okay, so the Jews needed to keep the Mosaic covenant, right? Until when?
Until Jesus came and died and rose again.
Okay, but you used another term.
New covenant.
New covenant, all right? What's that?
The one Jesus made.
What's the new covenant?
That those who believe in him shall not perish but have eternal life.
It sounds like John 3:16.
Yes.
That those who believe in Jesus will not perish but will have eternal life. That's the new covenant. Okay, when did the new covenant start? When he died on the cross? When he rose? When did Jesus mention the new covenant?
The Lord's Supper.
At the Lord's Supper. What's that?
The last meal he had with the disciples before he was crucified.
Yeah, what kind of meal was it?
Passover.
How do you know?
Because it says so.
Because we studied it last week. Did you guys study it last week?
Yes.
Passover? Didn't you have the feasts last week? No? Or yes?
We didn't feast when we looked into it.
I don't mean to keep looking over here, but there's not a lot coming from over here. Not that I'm expecting anything from you. So did you study the Passover last week?
Yes.
A little. Did you make the connection that the Passover was connected to the Lord's Supper, which is a term you used? Was that connection made? What? Okay. By the way, the term Lord's Supper is not a biblical term. Passover is a biblical term. So Jesus was having the Passover with his apostles. He's having a Passover with his apostles. And at what point did he institute the new covenant? Or what point did he mention the new covenant? At the Passover. Where in the Passover? Did you study that? No. Okay. Remember Jesus said, this bread is my body, and then he said, this cup is my blood of the new covenant. It's when he's holding the cup. It's a particular cup in the Passover. It's actually the third cup in the Passover. It's a cup of redemption. Does anybody know what the cup of redemption communicates? If I had a red marker, I would use it now. So you're going to have to be creative and see this as red.
Does it have anything to do with wedding vows?
Interesting. Why do you ask that?
I just, the new covenant, I think is built off of like a marriage type covenant where they both drink from the same cup before they get married.
Okay, that's interesting. When Jesus said, it's good if I go away, I will not leave you as orphans. Let not your heart be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms, dwelling places. If it were not so, I would have told you. But I go to prepare a place for you, that where I am, there you may be also. I go to prepare a place for you. That's wedding vows. That's the Jewish wedding system. I go to prepare a place for you. In my Father's house are many dwelling places. In other words, so the way a Jewish wedding went in Jesus' day, and still does in many religious Jewish societies today, is, the marriages are often arranged. You know that? Right? They are arranged between the fathers when the children are young. Could be. You could have an arranged marriage. You could be betrothed to this guy. Oh, thank you. You could be betrothed to this guy when you're 18 months old. Or you could be betrothed to this guy when you're 10 years old. Just depends between the fathers. Many religious systems, and definitely in Jesus' day. And so the father would have a house. The groom, when it was time to get married, the groom would go and build a room onto his father's house. And he was preparing a place for his bride. And he wouldn't know when he was going to come. Only when the father said, okay, son, your room is finished. Now you may go get your bride. And then the groom would go and get his bride and bring his bride to his father's house. And that's where they would live. That's what Jesus was telling his apostles. Also at the Passover. That I go to prepare a place for you. So what language is that? What's he talking about? Who are we? So he's talking about the church ultimately. Who's the church? What relationship does the church have to Jesus? The bride of Christ. And that's why he used the bride language. Okay, so when Jesus said, this cup is my blood of the new covenant, this is what he was talking about. It's actually down here as well. It's not quite as clear in Exodus chapter 12, but it is down here as well. Okay, does anybody know? Jesus, it's the Passover Seder. Seder. Do you know that word? Was that used last week? Okay, it's a Passover meal, and Jesus is holding up a cup, and he said, this cup is my blood of the new covenant. It's the third cup. It's the cup of redemption. It's the cup that has been drunk since 586 BC, or thereabouts, when the children of Israel went into Babylon, that they instituted this whole event. Passover comes from Exodus 12, when the children of Israel left Egypt. Passover comes from Exodus 12. But this part of the Passover, where Jesus holds up a cup, or where Jesus shows the bread, or where Jesus reveals his betrayer, that all started in 586 BC. And when Jesus holds up the cup, it's referring to this. What is that?
Redemption story.
Okay, Exodus, okay, in Exodus chapter 12. What is it? What is this representing?
Blood.
Blood, whose?
Jesus on the cross.
When he held up the cup? Yes, ultimately.
Yeah.
Blood of all the animals in the old covenant and the blood of him in the new covenant.
Sort of, yes. That's how he completed the old covenant, which is what you said, which is why we moved to the new covenant. But this in particular. That's correct. The blood on the lintel and doorposts of the houses. And it's not quite as clear, but if you know the Hebrew, you get the word threshold as well. That's where the animal's blood was shed. That's where the animal's blood, you kill the lamb right at the threshold, and then you dip the hyssop or the vegetable in the blood, and you put it on the lintel and doorposts of the house. And it's that blood that it's that blood that is being referred to when Jesus holds the cup. That's the blood he's talking about. It's not a random event. It's not just Jesus coming up with ideas in the middle of his Passover. It's a very specific event, pointing to a very specific previous event. He's not just randomly having a Passover with his apostles. It's been foreordained and prophesied and clearly laid out back in Exodus chapter 12. You see? So he's not just holding up a cup and saying, hey, well, what about New Covenant? Let's go with that. In fact, the New Covenant, did Jesus make up that term then? No. Where does that idea come from? Correct. Where? Jeremiah chapter 31. I'm going to make a covenant. I'm going to make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the family of Judah. Not like the old covenant which I made with them in the wilderness when I brought them out of the land of Egypt, the covenant which they broke. I'm going to make a new covenant, and this is the new covenant. I will write my laws upon their hearts. And I will forgive their sins, and I will remove their sins as far as the east is from the west. And another part of the new covenant is the indwelling, eternal, internal dwelling of the Spirit of God. That's what Jesus accomplished. So, even that's connected, you see, because it's one story being told. Okay, so we've got a little more. We've got a little more about Exodus. So we've got, we'll just say the Mosaic Covenant. What else about Exodus? Wandering in the desert. I'm just thinking about that. Is that correct?
I thought that was in Numbers.
It is Numbers. What happened in Numbers to cause them to start wandering?
I doubt, but I don't remember the specific doubt.
That's in Exodus.
Numbers is when they came towards the promised land, but they were all scared of all people living there, and they said, "Why did God bring us out to just have us die here?" They just complained to him, and so God just said, "Okay, this generation is gonna die out here.
That's
Your
right.
kids will be able to see the promised land."
That's right. Say that again clearly, that last line.
What? This generation?
Only, yeah, go ahead.
This generation is gonna die in the wilderness.
Yeah.
Only their kids are gonna get into the promised land.
That's correct. You realize that? Okay, so what are the details where that occurred? What were the details of how the children of Israel decided to not go into the promised land?
They went and spied out the land, and the report, all but one spy, said that their people were giants. They couldn't ever conquer them, so they were afraid. But I think it was Joshua. He was like, "We have God on our side. Why can't we take him down?" So they didn't believe Joshua, and they listened to all the people that were afraid.
And Caleb.
Joshua and Caleb, there were two. That's right. So Moses chose 12, one from every tribe of Israel. What's a tribe of Israel, by the way?
One of the sons of Jacob.
One of the, how many sons did Jacob have? Yeah, we haven't even talked about who Jacob is, have we? One of the 12 sons of Jacob became the 12 tribes of Israel. Oh, what's that? Jacob, Israel. Wait, we've got to figure that one out yet, right? And so Moses chose one from every one of the 12 tribes of Israel, sent them to the promised land, which we also need to talk about. And the 12 came back and 10 said, "We can't go in there. We're like grasshoppers in the sight of the giants. We can't go in there. They're going to destroy us." So, as a result, that generation that refused to go in died in the wilderness. Now, how long were they in the wilderness? 40 years. They wandered for 40 years, so I think actually it's 41 years, because it took them about a year for that event to occur from the time they left Egypt. So they wandered for 40 years until that generation died. Now, how big was that generation, by the way? How many people were there? Pardon?
Like 603,000. They didn't count.
It was 603,550 of you young men. 603,550 of you young men. We're told that in Exodus chapter 38, and we're told that in Numbers chapter 1, 603,550 of you young men. I'm not counted. I'm not seen as a young man. But by the time you're your age, fellas, you're married. So we're just going to go with 100%. So it's 603,550 of you young women as well. So then you get rid of, you do your math, and you come up to 1.2 million you. And that doesn't count children, so by the time you're your age, You already have at least 2 children, so we're going to double the number. So we're up to 2.5 million. That's how many came out of Egypt. How many went in?
Not very many. Just the family of Joseph.
70. 70 went in. How long were they in Egypt? 400 years. So over 400 years, the children of Israel went from 70 to 2.5 million. And if we were to read Exodus chapter 12, we would see that when this 2.5 million came out, a multitude, a mixed multitude also came out with them. Mixed multitude means the Egyptians or people from other nations who were in Egypt who have seen the workings of an almighty God who said, we got to go with these guys. So a mixed multitude came out as well. So I don't know how many it was. 3 million, 3.5 million who came out. But I think it's only the men who needed to die in the wilderness, that generation. Over a period of how long did they wander? 40 years, till 603,550 young men died. That was, I've done the math, I can't remember, it's like 40 some odd people a day died. And they had to be buried, I guess.
Well, there's lots of things that caused their deaths.
There was. Except they had food every day. And they had water, and their shoes never wore out. All right, so that's good. Okay, what else is happening in Exodus?
We've gone out of Exodus by now.
Who has?
Like, all the stuff about them leaving Egypt and, like, being in the wilderness and Exodus ends with a whole bunch of laws.
Okay, so what's your point?
We're not really in Exodus anymore.
Who's the we? Us in this discussion? 603,550 was in Exodus. That's where the number, it's in Exodus chapter 38. Anyway, does Exodus relate to Leviticus? Okay.
Chapter 35 was the construction of the tabernacle.
Ah, okay. The construction of the tabernacles. That's in chapter 35. Where else is it? 36, 37, 38, 39, 40. Where else is it? 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 31, 30, 31. I don't know how I missed 30. 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40. That's 13 chapters.
25 to 30 is 15, is it not?
25 to 30 is 15.
Sorry, 40.
Well, he didn't count 32 and 35. Or 34.
13 chapters out of 40. What's that percentage? Maybe Siri can tell us. What's the percentage? 13 out of 40. 30, yeah. 25% would be 10.
30%.
30%, it's actually, I think it's more like 33% of Exodus is what? Tabernacle. Oh, that seems significant, doesn't it? 33% is a tabernacle. Oh, that seems very significant then to me. In fact, if you just studied the tabernacle, you'd have a good handle on 33% of Exodus. I'm not sure how we're going to dive into the tabernacle this week, but we will. Very important. In fact, everything in the Bible is very important. Even the genealogies. Even the 613 laws, for the sake of understanding. Okay, so let me give you an overview. We need to come back and visit the idea of a promised land and the fact that we went from 70 million to 2.70 to 2.5 million. We need to come back and discuss all of these things, because unless you understand those things, you're not going to understand Exodus. You see, this discussion is also, you'll understand Exodus. We could dive in and just start reading it and talking about it, but without the context, it's going to be hard for you to understand. It's going to be hard for anybody to understand. So we're going to look to understand it. Okay, so let me give you a survey of Exodus, or an overview of Exodus, if I may. And if you can grasp this and hold on to this, you'll have a handle on Exodus. We have 3 minutes to get this done. Chapter 1 is, it's really just a review of Genesis. So it's, it's slavery. Thank you. It's slavery. Chapter 2 is Moses. Chapters 3 and 4 is the burning bush. Chapters 5 through 11 is basically before Pharaoh. Chapters 12 and 13 is getting out, their exit. Chapter 14 is the Red Sea. Chapters 15 through 19 is getting themselves, their journey to Sinai. Chapter 20 is the Ten Commandments. Chapters 21 through 23 is more commandments. Chapter 24 is Moses on the mountain. Let's just go 24 through 31 is the tabernacle. I'm sorry, I've run out of room. Chapter 32 through 34 is the golden calf and what follows. And chapters 35 through 40 is the tabernacle. That's your outline of Exodus. Thanks for taking a picture. I'm not sure you'll be able to read it. I'm sorry that's all the space I've got. This is your outline of Exodus. Okay, so we have to stop now. But what we're going to do when we return third hour is we're going to look at this. I'm just going to write it here. We're going to look at this whole idea of Abram, because that's kind of where we started. The details of this guy. And we're going to look at promised land. What are we talking about there? We're going to look at going from 70 people to 2.5 million people. We're going to look at this whole idea of blessing all the nations. What on earth is that about? Okay, so Alexis told us it's about Jesus, but what do we really? What does that mean back then? Blessing of the nations. So this is where we're going to go next hour. Blessing of the nations, going from 70 to 2.5 million, the promised land, all in the context of this guy named Abram. That's where we're going next hour. I know, we haven't even read the Bible yet. Anything, have we? We will. We talked about it. We didn't even read it. We will. We'll read the Bible a lot. Okay, take a break.